A 3-meter trench wall fractures. Tons of compacted soil cave in, freezing milliseconds before crushing a groundworker. The site office records show total compliance. The risk assessments and method statements, or RAMs, bear every required signature. The morning toolbox talks are logged and filed. NEBOSH examiners treat administrative perfection as a potential mask for danger. True site safety exists at the intersection of an organization's safety culture, human factors, and dynamic risk assessment. Success in the NEBOSH construction certificate requires deconstructing the drivers of worker behavior and translating psychological factors into quantitative physical risk controls. Safety culture is the reality of site behavior. Peer group pressure frequently dictates how tasks are performed, often superseding the formal safety training received during induction. The health and safety executive maps these behaviors through a human factor triad. In this animated diagram, the organizational gear is the largest. It represents leadership, resource allocation, and work patterns, acting as the primary force that dictates overall site behavior. The job gear represents task complexity and the physical environment, while the individual gear represents personal skill, attitude, and perception. When an organization accelerates a schedule, it forces the job gear to grind under high workloads, which causes the individual gear to shake violently under the pressure. In our trench collapse scenario, the organization compressed the construction schedule. This created a high workload environment that pressured the individual worker to take a shortcut to meet the daily target. An unsafe act by a single worker is the predictable final output of a compromised organizational culture. According to HSE guidance document HSG 48, human error contributes to A. Identifying the specific mechanism of failure is a core exam requirement. This branching logic tree categorizes human failure into two main paths: errors and violations. Errors represent unintended actions or deviations from an acceptable standard. Errors further divide into skill-based and knowledge-based failures. Slips are physical failures, such as operating the wrong control on an excavator. Lapses are memory failures, like omitting a step in a safety checklist. Mistakes are cognitive. The operator acts based on a rule or assumption they believe to be correct. The second branch, violations, involves deliberate, conscious decisions to break site rules or safety legislation. Violations are classified as routine, situational, or exceptional. Routine violations occur when rule breaking is normalized, such as failing to wear mandatory hearing protection. Situational violations occur when external pressures, like a lack of proper equipment, make compliance difficult. Exceptional violations occur during a crisis. This source image shows the ruined reactor building at Chernobyl, an exceptional violation driven by emergency improvisation. Our trench collapse worker entered an unshored excavation to save time. This constitutes a situational violation. The management framework failed long before the trench wall collapsed. Effective interventions rely on visible management commitment. A supervisor leading from the front of an active steel frame site establishes clear standards and models the expected behavior for the entire workforce. UK law mandates consultation with the workforce. The specific legal framework used depends entirely on whether a trade union is recognized by the employer. The Safety Representatives and Safety Committees Regulations 1977 apply where a trade union is recognized. This image anchors the concept of collective bargaining. These regulations allow unions to appoint safety reps who have statutory powers to carry out formal workplace inspections every 3 months. This comparative ledger shows the secondary framework, the Health and Safety Consultation with Employees, Regulations 1996. In non-union environments, the workforce elects representatives of employee safety, or ROSE. These representatives hold different entitlements and lack the statutory right to perform quarterly inspections. Management communication must account for peer group influence. Interactive toolbox talks engage workers directly, whereas static posters and memos depend entirely on literacy and individual attention spans to be effective. Legally compliant, active consultation bridges the gap between management's written rules and the workforce's daily reality. Hazard identification must be systematic. Risk profiling is a strategic process for mapping all threats to an organization. Risk assessment is a tactical, 5-step legal evaluation of a specific construction task. Step 1 is identifying the hazards. Step 2 involves identifying who might be harmed, including specific legal considerations for vulnerable groups, such as young workers, expectant mothers, and lone workers. Step 3 evaluates the risk and existing precautions, using a semi-quantitative matrix. In this animated 4x4 hazard index table, a likelihood of 4, meaning almost certain, and a severity of 4, meaning major injury, multiply to produce a critical score of 16. To reduce this score, we apply the general principles of prevention through a strict hierarchy of control. The matrix transforms into a top-down cascade: elimination, substitution, engineering controls, administrative controls, and finally, personal protective equipment. Administrative controls and PPE are the weakest defenses because they rely entirely on human behavior. These measures are only appropriate once engineering controls have been exhausted. A rigorous risk assessment mandates the deployment of hard physical controls on site, making dangerous situational violations physically impossible to execute. NEBOSH examiners prioritize the application of theory to complex environments. A multi-crane urban site requires you to diagnose layered hazards rather than reciting rote definitions. Avoid common learner mistakes. Maintain the distinction between a cognitive mistake and a memory lapse. Clearly separate the statutory powers of union-appointed safety reps from those of non-union elected ROEs. Warning tone. Relying on more toolbox talks or wearing a harness as the primary control for a high-risk hazard, such as a fragile roof, is a significant exam trap. Element 2 centers on a clear loop. A strong organizational safety culture shapes human factors, reducing deliberate violations and ensuring risk assessments become physical site realities. Passing Element 2 requires the ability to diagnose root behavioral causes and implement physical controls that address the underlying hazard.